My name is Celeste Thornton. I'm 41 years old, I live outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, and I am a licensed forensic accountant with 17 years of experience tracking down financial fraud for corporations, law firms, and federal agencies. I say that up front because it matters, not to impress you, but because when I tell you that I almost got completely played by someone I trusted, I need you to understand that this was not a case of someone missing obvious signs. This was a carefully constructed long game, methodical, patient, designed by someone who understood exactly how I think and used that understanding against me. I caught it by 6 weeks, maybe less. Let me start at the beginning. I met my husband, Ryan, at a conference in Atlanta 7 years ago. He was presenting a panel on commercial real estate development trends, and I was there representing a client firm. He was not what I expected from a real estate developer. Quiet, thoughtful, the kind of man who listens more than he talks and remembers everything you say. We exchanged numbers at the end of the day, and he called exactly when he said he would. We dated for 2 years, got married on a Saturday in late October at a vineyard outside Asheville. Outdoor ceremony, mountains in the background, leaves at peak color. It was exactly the wedding I'd always pictured. The best man at that wedding was a man named Caulfield. Derek and Ryan had been business partners for 8 years before I ever came into the picture. They'd built their commercial real estate consulting firm together from nothing. 2 guys splitting the rent on a tiny office in Raleigh, cold calling developers, working weekends, grinding through the first 3 years before things started to move. By the time Ryan and I got married, Caulfield Thornton Consulting had 22 employees, a client list that included some of the largest mid-market developers in the Southeast, and a reputation that had taken nearly a decade to build. Derek gave a toast at our wedding that I still think about. He talked about the year he and Ryan almost lost everything. A deal that collapsed, a client who walked, a month where neither of them knew if they'd make payroll. He talked about what it means to trust someone with the version of yourself that isn't finished yet. And then he looked at me and said I was the best thing that had walked into either of their lives. The room was quiet in that particular way rooms get when something true has been said out loud. I liked Derek enormously. He was warm, attentive, sharp. He had a way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room without it feeling performative. His wife, Sandra, was one of the first real friends I made after relocating to Charlotte. We had them over for dinner regularly. We spent Thanksgiving together one year when travel plans fell through. He felt like family. That is the only way I know how to say it. And that is the part I need you to hold on to. Because nothing that comes after makes sense unless you understand how completely I trusted this man. About 20 months into our marriage, Ryan started to change. At first I told myself it was work stress. He'd always been a processor, someone who worked through things internally before bringing them to you. So when he started coming home distracted, I gave it room. When he started being short with me over small things, I reminded myself that everyone has bad stretches. When he started sleeping with his back to me every night and disappearing into the bathroom with his phone, I stopped giving it room. I had been married once before, briefly, in my early 30s. I recognized the shape of a man who was carrying something he didn't want you to see. I assumed he was having an affair. I was wrong. But I didn't know that yet. What I did instead of confronting him was what I always do when something feels off. I watched. I'm a forensic accountant. Watching and documenting is the entire job. I started paying closer attention to our household finances. Not because I suspected fraud yet, just because when your instincts tell you something is wrong, you look for evidence wherever your training points you. What I found took about 3 weeks to fully surface. Small withdrawals, irregular timing, never the same amount twice. $360 on a Tuesday in February, $1,100 the following Thursday. Once, over a long Memorial Day weekend, $4,800 across 3 separate transactions. No vendor names I recognized. No recurring structure. No explanation in any account notes. I went through everything twice. Pulled statements going back 22 months. Mapped every transaction I couldn't account for against every legitimate expense I could verify. The total came to $281,000. I sat with that number for 3 days. I wanted to be certain I wasn't missing something. An account I hadn't been looped into, a tax arrangement Ryan had set up before we were married, anything that would make that number mean something other than what it looked like. There was nothing. On a Wednesday evening, I sat down across from Ryan at the kitchen table with the records printed and organized in front of me. I did not lead with accusations. I slid the first page across to him and said, "Walk me through this." He looked at the page, and something behind his eyes just gave out. He cried in a way I'd never seen from him. Not defensive crying, not the kind that's really about managing your reaction, the kind that happens when someone has been holding something unbearable for a very long time, and the weight of it finally exceeds what a person can carry. He couldn't get words out for a while. When he did, they came in fragments, and it took nearly 4 hours to get the full picture. Derek had been running a secondary operation alongside the firm. Using the firm's existing client relationships he and Ryan had spent 8 years building, Derek had been quietly steering certain deals through a separate LLC he'd formed on his own. The entity was called Southeastern Advisory Partners, registered in Delaware, opened nearly 2 years before I noticed the first missing dollar. The clients whose deals were being rerouted had no idea. The firm's books didn't reflect it cleanly, and every dollar of profit from those deals went directly to Derek. When Ryan first noticed the irregularities and went to Derek, Derek had been calm. Almost bored, Ryan told me, because Derek had been prepared for that conversation. He had documentation, records from the early years of the firm, decisions Ryan had made when they were desperate and cutting corners to survive. Nothing that crossed a clear legal line, but the kind of gray area material that, in the hands of a motivated regulator or a determined opposing attorney, could be made to look very bad. Derek had been keeping that documentation for years, and he'd made clear to Ryan, quietly and without raising his voice, that if Ryan said a word about what Derek was doing, that material would find its way to people who would act on it. So Ryan had kept quiet. And to keep Derek quiet, Ryan had been paying him, slowly, in amounts small enough that he hoped I wouldn't notice, out of our joint accounts. For 20 months, nearly 2 years of hush payments, made in secret, inside our marriage, without a single word to me. I want to stop here for a moment. I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking Ryan doesn't deserve much sympathy. You're thinking I should have walked out that night. I understand that reaction completely. What I actually felt sitting across from him was something harder to name. Fury, yes. A deep and specific kind of hurt. But also something that felt like grief, because the man across from me was not the man I thought I'd built a life with, and I hadn't decided yet whether that was because he was worse than I believed, or because I hadn't understood how much he'd been quietly drowning. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for him. I'm telling you what it was like to be in that room. What I told him was simple. We are going to fix this. Not just find it. Fix it. And the first step was a dinner. Hey, if you're new here, this is Revenge Eva, and we post real stories about betrayal, accountability, and the moments people finally decided enough was enough. If this story has you locked in right now, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming. And if you've ever had someone in your life who you trusted completely and shouldn't have, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let's get back to Derek. Derek came on a Friday evening. He brought a bottle of Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir, good label, the kind of wine you bring when you want someone to think you have taste and money and nothing to hide. He hugged me at the door, told me I looked great, sat down at my kitchen table like he owned every room he walked into. Over dinner, he was attentive to me in a way I hadn't fully registered before. Not to Ryan, to me. How was work? Was I taking on anything interesting? Did I feel settled in Charlotte? Did I feel like things were good? Was I happy? He asked it gently, with an expression that looked exactly like genuine care. And then, near the end of the evening, he looked directly at me and said, "Celeste, whatever's going on with Ryan, whatever he might have told you, I just want you to know, I'm on your side." I smiled. I said thank you. I poured him more wine. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table alone for a long time. Why would he say that? Ryan hadn't told Derek what I knew. As far as Derek was aware, I was a wife who'd noticed her husband seemed off. Nothing more. There was no surface reason for Derek to pre-position himself as my ally against Ryan unless he had already been thinking about a moment when Ryan and I would be on opposite sides. Unless that moment was something he'd been working toward. Unless creating that division was part of the plan. I went back through the past 20 months with that question in my mind. The texts first. Derek had sent me maybe 10 or 11 messages over the past year and a half. Casual, warm, nothing alarming on its face. Just checking in. Ryan seemed distracted this week. Hope everything's okay at home. Or, Sandra mentioned you seemed a little stressed at dinner. I'm around if you ever need to talk. I'd read them as friendly concern at the time. Reading them again, in sequence, they looked like a slow and deliberate drip. He'd been softly, repeatedly planting the idea that something was wrong with Ryan, that Ryan was the source of the friction, then the comments about Ryan's past. Derek had mentioned twice, different occasions, casual tone, the way you'd mentioned something slightly embarrassing about a mutual friend, that Ryan had gone through a period in his late 20s where he wasn't always faithful. I'd filed it away as old friend oversharing. It was not oversharing. And then the one that stopped me completely. About 9 months ago, Derek had stopped by the office on an afternoon I happened to be visiting Ryan. He'd pulled me aside in the hallway, just briefly, and said he was a little worried about Ryan, that he seemed stressed about some financial stuff, and that if I ever wanted to talk through anything, Derek was there. He'd said it like a considerate friend covering his bases. That conversation was the reason I had started looking at the accounts. Derek had aimed me at the financial trail. He had done it carefully, under cover of concern, because he needed someone with my exact professional skills to surface the missing money, and he needed me to surface it while my eyes were on Ryan. If I had followed the trail the way he'd designed it, I would have found nearly $300,000 leaving our household accounts, traced it to transfers Ryan had personally authorized, and concluded, as a forensic accountant, as Ryan's wife, with every professional and personal reason to trust my own findings, that my husband had been stealing from our family to cover something he was hiding from me. Derek's name would not have appeared anywhere obvious. The LLC was structured carefully enough that a standard review wouldn't catch the connection. I would have been the instrument of Ryan's destruction, and Derek would have been the concerned, grieving friend standing in the wreckage, having tried so hard to warn me. He wasn't just blackmailing Ryan. He was using me, my skills, my position, my trust in my own judgment, to take Ryan apart, and he had come within one sentence of pulling it off. I want to ask you something right now. At what point did Derek feel wrong to you? Was it the dinner? The texts? Before that? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know when it clicked. Here's what I did next. I did not confront Derek. I did not tip my hand. I am a forensic accountant. I know that a clean, fully documented case is worth 10 times a rushed one. And a rushed case against someone as careful as Derek would give him every opportunity to reposition and walk away clean. I made one call to an attorney named Margaret Holt, based in Charlotte, specializing in securities fraud and financial crimes. She had been recommended to me by a federal prosecutor I'd worked with on a case 2 years prior, which is the kind of recommendation that means something. I sat in her office on a Saturday morning with everything I had and walked her through it from the beginning. She listened without interrupting. Then she told me exactly what we could prove, what we couldn't yet, and what we needed. What we needed was direct evidence linking Derek to the LLC transactions. Not through Ryan, not through the firm's books. Derek's own hands on the accounts. I spent the next 7 weeks getting it. I won't walk through every technical step, but I will tell you that when a forensic accountant with 17 years of experience is motivated, working with a sharp attorney, going after someone who thought he was careful enough, you find what you need. The LLC registration tied back through a registered agent in Wilmington, Delaware to an email address Derek had used. The account access logs for Southeastern Advisory Partners showed login activity from an IP address registered to Derek's home network in Ballantyne. The client correspondence, once we subpoenaed it, showed deal language that matched Derek's writing style precisely and contained references that only someone with access to the firm's internal files could have known. Margaret described the file, in her measured and precise way, as airtight. Then I called Derek. I told him I'd found some irregularities in the firm's books that I needed another set of eyes on. Nothing urgent, just wanted to get ahead of it. Could he come by the house Saturday evening? Ryan would be there. Just the three of us, shouldn't take long. He said of course. He sounded completely relaxed. He brought wine, same label as last time. He walked into my living room, and Margaret Holt stood up from the chair in the corner. I've watched a lot of people get caught in my career. There is always a moment, usually about 2 or 3 seconds long, where the face does things the person isn't controlling. Derek's face went through confusion, then recognition, then something that looked almost like respect, and then settled into a careful blankness that told me his attorney had prepared him for exactly this kind of moment. He said he wanted a lawyer. He said Ryan had been aware of everything from the beginning. He said I had no idea what I had actually married into. Margaret handed him the summary document. He stopped talking. The case settled 8 months later, 14 counts. Wire fraud, securities fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent inducement, and several related charges that took Margaret about 5 minutes to list, and that I found deeply satisfying to sit through. Derek surrendered his professional licenses. He and Ryan dissolved the firm. He repaid a substantial portion of what had been taken, including every dollar that had left our household accounts. There was no trial. His attorney looked at the documentation and advised settlement immediately. His wife Sandra called me once, about 2 weeks after everything became public. I let it go to voicemail. I haven't listened to it. I don't know that I will. Ryan and I had a road after the legal case that was longer and harder than I expected it to be. The deception he'd carried inside our marriage, 20 months of silence, 20 months of payments made from our shared accounts without a word to me, was not something I could set aside because I understood the pressure he'd been under. I did understand it. I also understood that he had made a choice, repeatedly, to carry it alone. To let it cost us in ways I never got a vote on. Both of those things were true at the same time. We stayed together. We went to therapy with a counselor in South Charlotte named Dr. Patricia Webb, who had a way of naming things accurately that made some sessions genuinely difficult to sit through. We had conversations that I would come home from needing an hour of quiet before I could function. There were months where I wasn't sure we were going to make it. There were months where I was sure we weren't. We are still married. What we have now is not the same as what I thought we had before. It is more honest, more careful. There are things that got broken that didn't fully repair. I don't have a clean resolution to offer you on that part because there isn't one. What I can offer you is this. The person in this story who seemed the most trustworthy, the one with the good wine and the beautiful wedding toast and the thoughtful check-in texts and the hand on your arm in the hallway, was the one running the operation the entire time. Every performance of honesty was a transaction. Every expression of concern was a calculated investment in being the last one standing when everything collapsed. The warmth was real enough to feel genuine. That's what made it work. Watch for the audition. Watch for the person who works unusually hard to establish their trustworthiness before you've given them a reason to prove it. Watch for the one who positions themselves as your ally against someone else with just a little too much readiness, like they'd already thought through what side they'd be on before the sides even existed. People who have nothing to hide don't usually spend that much energy making sure you know it. If this story landed somewhere personal for you, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. And if you've ever had someone work hard to be the person you trusted most while quietly making everything worse, share it. Those stories deserve to be told. If you're new here, welcome to Revenge Eva. We post every week. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, and we will see you next time.